And what would happen is that the oil price, Russia's oil price, just Russia's oil price would collapse. It would go down 50, 60%. And Russia would still find some buyers for its oil, but it would be at such a big discount that in 6 months' time, Putin would run out of money. That's how Trump could end this war today if he chose to.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got Sir Bill Browder back on the show, and just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Bill, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
Let's start off with these comments from Vladimir Putin. He said this today. Today is Friday. He said that Trump is definitely making an effort and working on these issues of achieving peace and resolving complex international affairs. The clearest example of that is the situation in the Middle East. He was asked whether or not he believes that the US president deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He says, I don't know, but he is truly doing a lot to resolve complex crises that have dragged on for years, even decades. Bill, what is the angle here with this praise?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely horrific and ridiculous for Vladimir Putin to be talking about peace prizes. Vladimir Putin is the source of one of the most horrific wars in the world, and killing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. And he's not a person to be commenting on peace prizes for anybody about anything. He's a war criminal. He's an indicted war criminal. For him to be talking about the Nobel Peace Prize, whether Trump deserves it or not, is just absurd. He should be, talking about, the international tribunal at The Hague, not that he's going to have to face, not any peace prizes of anybody else. I mean, it's just horrible for him to be getting involved in that conversation, and just, so dark.
And this comes off after on Tuesday, Bill, he emphasized that the only way to resolve conflict in the Middle East is through political and diplomatic means, and that Russia was prepared to support any peaceful efforts aimed at stopping the bloodshed and bringing peace to the region. So how do you feel when you see the Russian president making comments about stopping conflict in the Middle East, stopping the bloodshed, and that the only way to do it is through diplomatic means, when he's literally orchestrating his own avoidable war where he's had 1 million Russians killed and at least 60,000 Ukrainians?
Well, President Trump, a number of months ago, demanded of both the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin that they institute a ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire, in which they could then, through diplomatic means, come up with a long-term peace. And immediately after that demand, President Zelensky said he would adhere to that. And then Putin said nothing. He said he would not adhere to that. And since then, he's been every night bombing Ukrainian civilians. Last night was a terrible night in Ukraine, as was the night before and the night before that. He's not engaging in any kind of diplomacy. And so for him to be talking about this stuff is just so cynical. It defies words for him to make these statements. But that is the nature of Vladimir Putin. It's a criminal regime. The absurdity of it's Orwellian. The absurdity of their statements when they're conducting this unbelievable war of terror. And just to put this in perspective, every night they launch a bunch of missiles towards civilians in Ukraine, and not one Ukrainian knows whether they're going to survive until the morning. And this is like every day. It's a terrorist attack. It's like we're now going into nearly 4 years of this. It's like, there's been more than 1,000 days, and 1,000 days of the equivalent of Osama bin Laden, attacking civilians. It's just, inconceivable what the Ukrainians are going through. And for him to make those comments just makes my blood boil.
And it wasn't even Peskov saying this, Bill. It was actually Putin himself for a rare occasion. But look, it's great that Donald Trump has helped broker this first phase of this 20-point peace plan for Gaza. But are you worried that this will distract him from any sort of headway with Ukraine?
Well, the good news is that the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, won the Nobel Prize. And so, to the extent that his motivation for insisting on peace in various parts of the world is the Nobel Prize, there's another year that he's got to do hard work. And maybe during that year, he'll somehow resolve the Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And if he does that, I will support him on a Nobel Prize as well. But he's got a lot of work to do in this. At the moment, he's made no real effort to get Putin to the table. Putin doesn't come to the table because his buddy asks him to. Putin comes to the table because he's forced to, and President Trump has not forced Putin to the table, and so he needs to get forced to the table, and Putin needs to be in a position where he has no choice but to negotiate, and we're a far way away from that right now.
Putin on Tuesday, he was boasting about Russian forces capturing 5,000 square kilometres of land in Ukraine in 2025, and that Russia was winning the war. But these 2025 gains, Bill, that only totals around 1% of extra Ukrainian land that they've made since the 2025 year began. So is this a prime example of Putin's propaganda being spun to his people?
Well, well, the main thing that we need to look at is that 1% of land, which is not particularly strategic land, ended up with more than 300,000 casualties on the Russian side. They've either lost through death or disability more than 300,000 soldiers in 2025. And so it's an unsustainable situation. There's no way that they would take them, if they only got 1% of the land, then it would take them another 99 years and another, God knows how many soldiers dead to get that. And by the way, the other thing which nobody seems to understand, and I urge listeners to do this in your spare time, is just look at a map of Russia, how big it is. It's just this unbelievably large country. And then to look at the amount of territory that they've gotten since they've started this full-scale invasion. And it's just a tiny little sliver. It's like a tiny little dot on a just gigantic map. They don't need any more territory. Now, this is not even about territory. This is purely about Putin needing a foreign war, a foreign enemy, in order to stay in power. And so it's not about the land. And in a certain way, Putin will carry on doing this no matter how much land he gets, no matter how many casualties he experiences, until the moment that he's forced to come to the table. And that's going to be the moment that the Ukrainians have a military advantage and he's suffering financially, which at the moment, neither of those two conditions are present.
Donald Trump, on Monday, he said he wants to know what Ukraine plans to do with these Tomahawk missiles before agreeing to provide them to Ukraine, because he says he doesn't want to escalate the war. But he did say that he's sort of made his decision. But Bill, what's your response to this hold-up? Because isn't it clear what they plan to do with these Tomahawk missiles?
Well, Trump is spending a lot of time saying Joe Biden is this, Joe Biden is that, attacking Joe Biden. Well, he should take a good look at Joe Biden, because that's exactly what Joe Biden said when the U.S. went under the Biden administration, when they supplied ATACMS missiles to Ukraine. They said you can't use them. You can only use them inside your own territory. You can't use them to hit Russians in their territory. And so the Russian troops would gather up right outside Ukrainian territory for their next assault. And according to U.S. restrictions, they couldn't hit those troops with those ATACMS missiles. That's the same exact thing. He's being very Biden-like in this condition. And I would say that in a certain way, one of the blessings of Trump's policy towards Ukraine, the policy of ceasing military aid up until now, is that he couldn't make conditions on what the Ukrainians did inside Russian territory. And as a result of not having any restrictions, the Ukrainians have launched an absolutely devastating drone attack on the oil and gas infrastructure of Russia. And if every day now there's a new video of an oil refinery being blown up by Ukrainian drones. The Russians don't have the capacity, the air defense to stop them. And so, depending on whose estimates you look at, somewhere between 20 and 40% of oil refining capacity in Russia has been destroyed. And as a result of that, there are gas shortages all over Russia. And as a result of that, the Russians who were unaware of the costs of war are now getting to see it firsthand as they line up for a mile-long lines for gasoline in many parts of Russia.
A lot of gas rationing going on in some eastern parts of Russia. As you said, yeah, it's hit home now for everyday Russians who rely on that, everyday businesses. But Dmitry Peskov, he responded to Trump's comments about sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. He said that it was important to realize if we abstract from various nuances, we're talking about missiles that could also be nuclear capable. Therefore, this is truly a serious round of escalation. So Russia's consistent remarks about Tomahawks and how it would escalate the war should surely be an indication that Putin is worried that these missiles will make a difference to strike further into Russia, and therefore shouldn't that be reason to send them immediately?
Well, we should send them immediately and without any question, because their remarks are irrelevant. And again, this is very Biden-like. If there's any hesitation to send these because of those comments, it's very Joe Biden-like. Because if you remember, the U.S. wouldn't send tanks because the Russians said that would be an escalation, and if it's escalating, it could go out of control. And of course, they then dropped the nuclear word into various threats through Dmitry Medvedev, the drunk former president, and then it was all about F-16s, and then it was all about attack-am missiles. Every time the U.S. would supply more weapons, the Russians would threaten nuclear war. And of course, there is no nuclear war, and there won't be a nuclear war, because if there is any kind of nuclear attack, that would lead to a mutually assured destruction of Russia. That's why no one has ever used, the Russians and the U.S. have not used nuclear weapons in the past, and that those conditions haven't changed. And so, of course, this is just bluster. It's nuclear saber rattling. The Russians do it every time. And if Trump responds to that, then he'll be just like Joe Biden.
And we know that they lie. We know that most of their threats are just pent up. But an interesting poll came out this week, Bill. A new Harvard-Harris poll found that 86% of Republicans want more sanctions on Russia, 66% support tariffs on nations buying Russian oil and gas, 73% of Russians back providing Ukraine, 73% of Republicans back providing Ukraine with weapons. So should Trump let go of any narrative that further aid and help to Ukraine will hurt him politically? I mean, given that he literally told the UN General Assembly that he thinks Ukraine is winning and that they can continue winning.
Well, I think that those are very important statistics that you've just cited, and they're not that out of the. It's not like those are new statistics. It's not like that American public opinion has changed. American public opinion has always been that Putin is a bad guy. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. That has been the U.S. public opinion for many years. And moreover, that has been the public opinion, or the opinion of very important Republican members of Congress. There's very few people who don't have that opinion in the United States, and very few people that don't have that opinion in the halls of power in Washington. And so that's what makes the Trump lack of punishment on Putin that much more bewildering, because he's not acting in the national interest or in the interest of his own party or the people in his party. He's come up with this policy of not punishing Putin on his own. This is his own personal opinion that unfortunately he's able to execute on, because he's the decision maker. He's the lone decision maker when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. Congress can decide on taxes and various other things, but Congress has no say over foreign policy. That's the unique position of the president. And so now that may have some influence on how Trump behaves. And if he continues to sort of pussyfoot around when it comes to Putin, that may have some impact on Republican senators and members of the House of Representatives as we go into various elections. But at the moment, it's obvious that Putin's the bad guy. Everyone understands that, and Americans support Ukraine.
I want to get your thoughts on the Russian economy, Bill, because Russia's stock market fell to its lowest level in 3 years on October 8th, so 2 days ago. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rykov, he warned that relations with the US are collapsing. The MOEX Russia index dropped 4.05%, with major companies like Gazprom all sliding sharply. Investors reacted to his remarks, and worsening geopolitical tensions, triggering widespread sell-offs across key energy, banking and industrial sectors. So is this significant and worrying for Russia, or is it kind of part and parcel with wartime economies?
Well, so one of the things that's really important to understand is that the Russian economy has not been doing well. Um, there's been a narrative coming from Putin and coming from the Kremlin is that everything is fine. We're cooking with gas. It's all good over here. We don't know why you guys are punishing yourself with these sanctions. We're doing just fine. You shouldn't even do this. That's their narrative. But the reality is different. The reality is that the economy is in a mess. It's in a terrible mess. There's so many different problems that they have in Russia. The entire gas export business, which was a huge part of their economy, no longer functions. The pipelines go to Western Europe. Western Europe is not buying Russian natural gas, which is an enormous amount of money missing. All these sanctions on other sectors really constrain what's going on. They can't borrow money in the international capital markets. A million able-bodied men, productive men, have fled the country not to be put into the meat grinder. Another million men are either killed or disabled, and it's just not a good economy. And so, to the extent that the Russian stock market was higher than it is today, was because everybody was betting on the fact that somehow, even though the economy was terrible, there would be some end to this nightmare, and they were hoping that Trump would be the end of that nightmare. Now, it doesn't mean that the market's going down because all of a sudden relations are bad. It just means that they're not good. It means that Trump hasn't somehow solved the war and ended this conflict. But it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going to see a new Cold War forming, because and up until today, Trump has not punished Putin. He's let 8 ultimatums slip for Putin. To punish Putin, to punish as the Americans wanted, to punish the buyers of Russian oil and so on. He's let 8 ultimatums slip and has done nothing. And so whatever words he said at the United Nations, those are just words. The reality is that the United States has stopped funding Ukraine militarily, and the United States has not imposed sanctions on Russia or the partners of Russia in this war.
News outside of Donald Trump, several EU governments are considering restricting internal travel for Russian diplomats across EU member states. So it would mean that a Russian diplomat stationed in one EU country would basically have to notify another EU state before travelling there. So these countries then have the option to deny their entry. So this is a very familiar subject to you, Bill. So the Kremlin have responded saying that Russia will issue an appropriate response if the EU does move forward with this. So do you think this is important for the EU to do this?
Well, I think not only should the EU do this, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of regular Russians, and I would say Russians with money, that have been enjoying the good life in Europe. So coming to France and Spain and Italy. And if you've gone on vacation in any of those countries, you've seen them for yourself. It's absolutely terrible that Russia is waging a war of aggression, and that these Russians are just living the good life in Europe. And so I think beyond just diplomats, the EU should limit Russian visitors, and they should just put a very simple form out there for anybody applying for Russia. Do you support Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine? And you're in your visa application, and you say, no, I'm against it, then they should be considered for a visa. But if they say they're for it, then visa should be denied. And let's see how many Russians want to fill out that form. And I think it's a very appropriate form, because I know the one group of Russians that should be allowed to travel are the Russian dissidents, Russian journalists, and those people who are being persecuted. And I know those people, what box they would check if that form were being instituted.
They checked that box, Bill, as if they would be allowed back into Russia.
Well, I mean, that is a consideration, but the point being that you can't have people who support the war the war of terror, Putin's war of aggression and terror against Ukrainians, living it up in Saint Tropez in the summer.
Russia's foreign deputy minister, he said on Wednesday, unfortunately, we must admit that the powerful momentum generated by Anchorage in favour of agreements has largely been undermined, and accused Europe of wanting to wage a war to the last Ukrainian. So, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but there wasn't really any momentum or any agreements made on Putin's visit to Alaska other than both him and Trump saying that it was productive.
It was one of the most shameful moments in American history to have a bunch of American soldiers on their knees rolling out a red carpet for an indicted war criminal, Vladimir Putin. It made my blood boil. It was just horrible. And there was no agreement there. The only thing that Putin achieved was to be allowed to carry on his murderous war without any sanctions, which is what had been threatened up until the minute of that summit, that Trump was going to impose sanctions if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire. He didn't agree to a ceasefire, and there were no sanctions.
Vladimir Putin turned 73 years old on Tuesday, October 7. Here's what India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrote on X. He said, "Spoke with my friend President Putin and conveyed warm birthday greetings and best wishes for his good health and long life. Deeply appreciate his personal commitment to deepening India-Russia ties over the years." So, I mean, Bill, does Modi clearly not care about Trump's economic threats to India and is happy to get closer with Putin?
Well, I think this is all a big game of trolling. Everyone seems to be trolling each other. It's really it's kind of funny. But I would say one thing, which is that if Trump wants to end this war, and he genuinely wants to end this war, there's a very easy way to end this war. At the moment, the main source of economic sustenance to Russia is their oil, their sale of oil. And what's interesting about the sale of oil is that hundreds of billions of dollars worth of oil are sold to three countries, China, India, and Turkey. And what's most interesting about it is that there's only 8 specific businesses, oil refineries, that are buying all the oil. And so if we wanted to stop Putin from fighting this war, from having the money to carry on with this war, we could go to those oil refineries, the United States, the EU, the UK, Canada, Japan, Australia, etc., and say, you have until December 1st to find other sources of oil. If you buy another drop of oil from Russia after December 1st, then all business, any business whatsoever with us will be forbidden. And then you have to make a choice. You can either buy some cheap Russian oil and then not have the rest of the world to sell to buy equipment from, to be insured by, to carry on banking business, or the other way around. You can do business with the rest of the world and you just don't get your cheap Russian oil. And what would happen is that the oil price, Russia's oil price, just Russia's oil price would collapse. It would go down 50, 60%. And Russia would still find some buyers for its oil, but it would be at such a big discount that in 6 months' time, Putin would run out of money. That's how Trump could end this war today if he chose to.
Instead, he's, hit tariffs on just India, not China. And there's a reason being, we assume, because he's meeting Xi Jinping next at the end of the month at the APEC summit and trying to work out some sort of trade agreement that benefits him, benefits the US. So we'll watch that. But Trump reportedly did not call Vladimir Putin for his birthday, despite Putin calling him in June for his. Is this a snub to the Russian dictator?
Well, I mean, coming back to your previous question about all of the U.S. public opinion being anti-Putin, I think that would be a pretty dumb thing to do politically for Trump, and to the extent it's easier for him not to impose sanctions, which is an act of omission, but to congratulate Putin on his birthday would be an act of commission. In other words, he'd be doing something active, which would be against the U.S. national interest. And Trump is politically very adept, and I'm sure he understood what that would mean.
So, Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.